Perfect. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Colleen Morgan, who's a senior lecturer in digital archaeology and heritage at the University of York. Colleen is director of the Digital Archaeology and Heritage Lab and leads both the Masters, the MSc in Digital Archaeology and MSc in Digital Heritage programs. With an international reputation in the field of critical digital archaeology, her research brings together digital methods, theory, and heritage practice. From feminist, queer, and post-human approaches to immersive storytelling, avatar-based embodiment of past people, and the interface of analog and digital methods in archaeological work. And today she will be speaking on gathering and mapping archaeological data for world building and other creative reuse, exploring how archaeological data can be mobilized for storytelling, creative reuse, and new forms of engagement in heritage, which is very, very exciting. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Colleen Morgan. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. That was an extremely generous opening, and I'm really honored to actually be invited here, as I genuinely really do want to hear feedback from this group as experts in information management. I recognize several names and several friendly faces, so thank you so much for coming. But yes, so this has been ongoing research that I have been conducting for 20 years, sometimes without even actually knowing it. So I am considered a creative digital archaeologist, and so I make sometimes very minimalist interventions in digital archaeology, such as the GIF, in the upper right-hand corner, which actually I'm not sure it's completely right. The longer I look at it, the more context I see. But I'm also very interested in knowledge production in archaeology, and that's represented by some of the drawing. So I've done filmmaking, virtual reality. I've done I've done photography over the years, light writing. And I just wanted to talk to you about a couple of the projects that I have engaged in, and maybe really try to understand with the group how we can bring archaeological data together. Because I'm even after all of these years, I love archaeology, and I think it's really fantastic for storytelling and for, again, creative world building. And if I can share that sense of love and excitement with other people, then all the better. And so I think more than almost any other constituency in archaeology, I think information managers will really recognize world building. It feels, as a concept, it feels so familiar and so comfortable, I think, to those who deal in databases. It is a word that is used within fiction and game creation to bring an imaginary world to life. So it involves history, geology, ecology. I can just see the metadata tags coming up right now. And sometimes it can be very top down, so kind of a world systems theory, or bottom up, which is household archaeology. We have lots of parallels within archaeology, but I quite like this very old school game representation of, world builder, that you can do this creative interactive program very early, because there is a world of possibilities awaiting you within archaeological data. And for me, I think there's been, in the last 20 years, actually more like 30 years, a lot of interplay between the concepts of storytelling within archaeology and more database approaches. So what I would call maybe more world building approaches. There's a lot of tension between trying to make narrative stories that are based in archaeology and the decisions that those entail, versus opening up data to create worlds, to invite other people in, including yourself, to make these stories together. And so there's projects that I've been involved in, including Tetrarchs, which is more recent, and with Holly Wright of the Archaeology Data Service. And I'm not going to be talking a lot about Tetrarchs today. We can talk about it afterwards in the Q&A if you want to. There's just too many projects to go over. And I do have some slides at the end if you wish to see them. But that was very much related to trying to make better stories out of archaeological data. But it really made me want to take a step back and look at the data that all of these stories are based on, and how we can collect that data together in a more interesting and productive way. And so it also involves some aspects of archaeogaming, so making kind of playful making, bringing together, exploring um, things together, because it's very much about community building rather than being the one person that stands up and tells a story about archaeology. I really want to build communities around archaeology and around archaeological data. Again, it really de-emphasizes the singular monolithic analyses that we're very used to. In the article accompanying this, I talk about kind of the very traditional way that we approach sites, if we're lucky, to be honest, in that we have holistic excavation, we have the specialist reports, and then the chapter at the beginning, that is the archaeological site director, that tells us the story of the archaeology, right? That gives us that meta narrative that we need, and which I quite like. I love a traditional archaeological site monograph, but it's actually not all that useful for what I'm talking about today. And let's just move on to, so it's really thinking about it as far as being creativity and making centered. So how do we actually make other interesting things out of archaeology? And as an archaeologist, as a field archaeologist, I think the real light bulb moment for me was working with reconstructing a site at Çatalhöyük. So, I was very used to destroying things. I've, very methodically, very carefully destroyed them. But being able to build it back was such an amazing experience for me that I wanted to do it more, and I wanted to understand what was the data that I would need, because I just found over and over again that to do this reconstruction, I just didn't have the complete picture. It just wasn't giving me enough. And so let's see. Let's go on to making people and making worlds. So I've been doing a lot of creative work in archaeology, and my most recent project, well, second most recent project, is Otherize, which I will discuss a little bit later. And but I wanted to go back to Çatalhöyük and Second Life, where this kind of all began. In that, I will only briefly describe this, but it was a open world created in Second Life. Which was a bit of a fusty, interesting, and now that I look at the graphics, it's actually not all that different from sort of Mark Zuckerberg's most recent stuff. So I don't feel that bad. But there are some visualizers that would definitely disagree with the clunkiness of the graphical interfaces. But much more than, the appearance of the thing, it was actually the making of the thing that I found the most interesting. Every time I made something, it just brought new questions up for me about archaeology. And so it was kind of a long-lived virtual reconstruction, and it was very odd because you think about virtual reconstructions as kind of these fixed scans or fixed photogrammetry models of a trench that kind of rotate in gray space, and you're like, oh, this is kind of interesting. But this was a very lived-in virtual reconstruction. We burned it down, we made it snow, we had plays. We made entire films, and that's a machinima here in the right-hand corner, where we all dressed up in sort of vaguely Neolithic looking wear and tried to enact some scenes. So I found this really, again, very inspirational, because the granularity of data at Çatalhöyük was great, but this was primarily because Ian Hodder employed very excellent, top of their game London archaeologists to excavate it in single context methodology. And so you found that you had the kinds of site plans, again, very detailed excavation methodologies that are very difficult to afford and are very rare, to be completely honest. But I find a lot of inspiration out of development-led archaeology for that reason, because it is mitigation. It is getting a holistic picture of the archaeological remains versus a research excavation, which interestingly is less useful for me because they tend to do kind of slot trenches in things, and it doesn't give me a very good picture. It may answer their research questions, but it doesn't actually give me a very good holistic picture of the data available about the past from that site. This is my beloved PhD supervisor, Ruth Tringham, to whom I owe everything probably, but she also liked to be a 7-foot tall green person and in Second Life, which really made me question sort of our sense of photorealism, how important it was. So building this over these years, the world is gone now. It's lives in a series of screenshots on my hard drive somewhere. I think my I still have my Second Life avatar. It has a kind of box of holding, a bag of holding that has a lot of the shapes and things involved. But it really taught me a lot about the legacy of these interventions and the importance of archives, such as the Archaeological Data Service. So it really led on to this project, Other Eyes, which was a creating a mixed reality experience based on bioarchaeological remains. So remains that were found here in York. It involved no new archaeological research. It was all archival or legacy data. And it was just really bringing together different strands from different approaches. The innovation that got it funded was very much about the trying to understand empathetic approaches to the past through avatars. So what does it feel like to actually walk in somebody else's recreated, possibly inaccurate skin? And that is still being published to a certain extent. So these are the kinds, some of the data that we're working with. And it was very, again, the fidelity was not complete because this is a very old excavation. So we had to decide on how big the room was. We kind of, this is kind of a sketch I made of a gladiator that was excavated at Durfold Terrace. And then the Ivory Bengal lady, who will become even more infamous in probably about a month. Watch this space. So we came together as a community. It was a very large research group to kind of recreate these people and spaces. And it ended in this experience that I found over and over again, really. When you try to create things, the more accurately you try to recreate them, the less accurate you actually are to the archaeological remains. It is an assemblage, so most virtual reconstructions are an assemblage of data. But then again, I mean, most museums are too, right? So it brings together kind of the charismatic, champion, interesting things that we find and presents them all together and creates this picture that is maybe not accurate, maybe not so great. But doing this sort of thing is really, really, really hard because the way that we set up data in archaeology does not at all translate very easily into experiences like this. So I kept on getting frustrated over and over again, saying, I really want to make very cool things, but nobody publishes in a way that makes it very easy for me. And archaeologists don't necessarily group data together in a way that makes accessible to me. And that said, it was a very multi-sensorial experience. And so I brought together some senses, and people were able to sit on cubes on the mosaic in the Yorkshire Museum. And that can be a whole other discussion. I know there has been already discussions about how to capture more multi-sensorial data within archaeology, and some of it is relying on ontologies and data structures. But it's still not quite enough. And that sometimes I think the solution is not necessarily to collect like even more data or even more descriptions, but actually to have the ones we get the data we can with greater fidelity and just greater, more linked data. So I promised Katie that I would actually show this as well. So this is one of the outcomes of the Other Eyes project. One of the work packages dictated that I document all the paradata, so all the decisions that went behind all of the interpretations that I made, which is you should absolutely do and follow the London Charter. It can be very, very difficult, but I decided to gamify it. It was a collaboration with one of my digital master's students, McKenna Crow. It was extremely difficult to assemble, and it required a very detailed accounting of the research project. But almost as interesting as anything else is that if you make a choose your own adventure about your own data process, you have to let people choose things that you don't choose. So you have to kind of reimagine your research project making decisions that you opposite of what you made, or like what would have looked like if you would have made a slightly different decision at any point. So there's a lot of fiction within this in this game, and it was also interesting because you instinctively, I guess, as a researcher, you're taught to make yourself the hero of the story. It's like, yes, of course, I'm brilliant. Give me more money to do more cool projects because I'm amazing. But recounting this, like, I didn't make the best decisions at every single point. And I kind of leave that up to the person who plays the game to navigate it. And so you can tell the decisions I made that have a yellow screen and the decisions I didn't make. I've embedded it in the slideshow, actually. I don't know. Can you see that? Yeah, okay. And so you go other eyes, you click here to begin, and then you get to work, you answer the door. It was during COVID, some of it, and so there's some things that reflect that, and start the meeting. But anyway, it was really fascinating research to undertake, and that I almost recommend it for anybody who wants to have almost a therapy level session about re-examining your research. But interestingly, a lot of this can be now done in a very much more automatic way. So we're teaching our students to automate some paradata gathering and automate metadata embedding in some of the projects they're making. So I think this might be a one-off. I don't know, unless the ADS tells us that we need to make games out of all of our archives. Right. So for this part, it's like the takeaways really is that they just don't, for a creative practitioner or an archaeologist that wants to do weird things with archaeological data, it almost never produces a useful past for me. The data, though, it must be robust, is carefully collected, recorded to a high standard to do the things I want to do. Full specialist engagement. I can see the price tag going up and up in projects. And seasonality is really, really important to doing these kinds of reconstructions. Getting high resolution phased plans, detailed photos of textures, materials grouped by assemblage. I mean, at the very minimum, I need everyone to take a 360 and a digital elevation model to do anything with your site, really. That is, we can work around it always, but that is kind of a minimum for some of the interpretive things, especially the ones I do in my classes. And all of this, though, I think really recenters the need for more trust and investment in craftspersonship in archaeology at all stages. I think this is even more of an argument with artificial intelligence and data fidelity, that the data granularity and production is such an important investment. Always has been, but going forward, it's so incredibly vital. So other things we need like big, diverse data sets that these projects rely on. It could be a very risky strategy towards reinterpretation, but it is very rewarding in that you do have different questions about the past. But again, I just really wanted to go through do these projects without having to do these difficult approaches. And so we reframed it really as world building. And some of this brings in more recent research with the Avery papers, which is a project to completely digitize and analyze the archive at Avebury. It ends in 2027, but we have most of the archive digitized to be deposited in December, hopefully. Katie, make notes, I guess. And it's been great working with especially Fran Alfrey, as she brought the project really into full conversation with Wikidata. And so we're exploring all sorts of new venues with this, but I've been using it in my digital creativity class to explore concepts of world building. I put this in here because I do actually still occasionally come across people who don't know Avebury. As an American, this absolutely gobsmacks me, but it's fine, So this is Avebury Henge, as we like to say, the best stone circle in the world. And we had lots of volunteers. We actually have way exceeded those photos. So it's an enormous, enormous digitizing project. And then my students have made many, many, many interpretations. I'm going to actually, this is a 360 multi choose your own adventure story. So you can go into this, and Duchamp introduces the site, but then you can choose whether or not you want to have a more traditional archaeological approach, or you want to have a slightly more fantastic approach to the site. It's going to play it whether I like it or not. So anyway, this is the 360. Sorry, I could watch this all day, but I'll leave that to you to look at later. It's had a very large social media presence as well, which I think will be sunsetted as the project comes to deposit and end. We had an entire pixelized cozy game based on it. So if anybody is a fan of Stardew Valley, one of the students actually made a 2D scroller that all based on this. It was great pixel art. We also were doing some things with machine learning and computer vision to recognize the individual stones, because they they were scrubbed of all the algae and things, and so it sometimes makes recognizing them in photos really, really difficult with the amount of photos we have. And so we've been working on that as well, because different angles show them differently. So just trying to get all of our data up to a good standard. But then again, I was using it in my teaching. And so I found over and over that I teach a lot of digital methods. I've taught VR, I've taught filmmaking, I've taught lots of ways to make things out of archaeological data over the years. But over and over, I was finding that methods-based classes really produced very superficial projects. Students would make things, and in theory there's nothing wrong with this, but they would make the same movie about the York Walls over and over again, or the about the cat trail. And so I didn't find that they were actually really engaging with archaeological data to the extent that they could be or should be, to really make very interesting interpretive projects. So I started having them do world building lectures, and this is partially based on world building handbooks. And so this one, world building handbook, I got some of the data categories from there, and some have just come organically as we've been making the interpretations. And it's been really great to have a set of questions to try to query the archaeological record with, that will help us build interesting, detailed stories from archaeological data. So for the first time, I was finding students presenting things on how was wood used at Avebury, going into really the most detail that they possibly could, and then drawing directly from the archive to try to understand different materials and how they could have been used. Sifting through the diaries and trying to pick out little instances of where any plants were mentioned. And you can, again, this is kind of making a knowledge graph, isn't it? It's tagging data up in a really interesting way. And so I found that through asking them to specifically investigate these different categories, that they were able to educate themselves about this very small bit of Avebury, and then educate the entire class through a presentation. And so everybody would learn together different aspects in order to build more detailed, cohesive projects. And I would ask questions like, so what colors were the wildflowers in spring at Avebury in the Neolithic? So these beautiful questions that I learned to ask through working with people living with dementia It's actually at the, capital B, capital Q, beautiful questions, in that they're questions that are evocative, multisensorial, and don't actually threaten the person when you ask them, because it's, the usual kind of model of archaeological outreach is very much a, well, look, it's a potsherd. You know what this is? It's a piece of Samian ware. But if you ask somebody living with dementia that says, what do you think this is? And they say, it's a bird. That's actually a response that might land people with more medication. The person attending might say, oh, they don't know what's going on. They need more help. They might get moved to a different facility away from their home, their family. And so it's being very careful and being very mindful about questions that you ask. But also the evocativeness is really nice. So you would say, is there anything here on this table that reminds you of home? Or trying to get senses that this is what the Romans would have smelled as they were bathing. What sort of smells do you have when you're bathing? I don't know, maybe you don't ask that one. Not so beautiful question. But similar. So I was getting things like these really wonderful basically Gantt charts of different flowers and whether or not they might have been blooming at any sort of time in the experience. Because again, making these interpretations asks for really, really detailed data. You want to know exactly what was in bloom on June 23rd in our time, 4,000 years ago. Again, really, so I was finding a depth and a beauty through engagement with data and engagement with the archive that I was just not seeing before through teaching through traditional methods. And these are some really beautiful drawings by Bryony, who is an archaeological illustrator. And this was the final project that had the plants in it. So this is fairly non-representational, but it is trying to show passage through time, is trying to show seasonality, is trying to show they also intentionally foregrounded an audience that might have a different engagement with sights and sounds and really wanted to evoke peace and tranquility through a digital medium. And after, as somebody who has marked probably 300 3D reconstructions of, castles and Neolithic longhouses at this point, this was amazing to receive. And so I only really think that this came about because we started looking at archaeological data a little bit differently. So I just wanted to wrap up, I think. And I have a few more examples if we can talk about them later if you wish. But the future of this approach really is we are building a world building card game. And so these are kind of operationalizing these questions, these beautiful questions that that we've formed into a game that you play several rounds through and build worlds together. And I really want to be able to test this game at actually archaeological sites and laboratories and see if I can, at the proverbial edge of the trowel, see if we can think together and dream together different categories of data in archaeology. And I feel like this is really very based on trust and communication because again, I've been an archaeologist in the trench where there's a camera looking down at me, and you always know to just like brush really slowly, right, at that point. And so not trusting the people that come and just have this extraction based thing that they want to do. I'm a heritage interpreter. I want to, extract something from your brain and go off and make a signboard about it. But for me, it's very much digging in the trench next to the person and discussing this over pot washing. And so we're doing this with Stewie, Aris Politopoulos, and Catherine Kalaki. So that's a person that's Stewie from Wessex, and I've known him for ages, and Aris, who is a specialist in games and play in archaeology, and Katie Clockey is an archaeological illustrator. So we came together to try to prototype this in December. And we want to trial the game with archaeological units, but we are also in talks about how to best manage and archive this kind of data. There's funding bids both in progress that have been already submitted. I think there's quite a few of us, a little community of us working on similar projects all here at York, which is really, really useful, and I draw a lot from, including like Holly Wright and my great colleague James Taylor. But also ones that have yet to be submitted, which again, I'm bothering Katie about at some point. But there's inspirational work within this vein all over, like the most recent publication of Carved in Stone, which is a fantastic world building book, all based on the Picts in Scotland, where they go through and they talk about the landscape and they talk about food and clothing and all those really awkward questions that you get as an archaeologist from my 9-year-old daughter standing at the edge of the trench. But what did they wear on their feet? I don't know. Let's figure that out together. So yeah, thank you. I really, really invite any questions and any insights, any ideas would be really, really appreciated, because your expertise is extremely valuable, and I just want to share this together. So thank you.